All right, let's look at modeling floors in Revit. Floor command is very easy to use, not very complicated as far as options are concerned. Basically, when we think about modeling floors, we have to think about elevation. Where do we want the floor created? We need to think about whether or not we want slopes applied to a floor. We need to think about whether or not we need any openings in the floor for whatever reason. So we're going to sort of cover all that. So this is a basic model I've started, and I'm just going to use the wall command here, and I will use generic 6-inch, level 1 base constraint, top constraint. I will set to level 2, and I'm just going to model a rectangular building. Like so. I'll put a, oops, escape there. I'll draw a wall here. And I'll draw another wall from here to here. If we look at this in 3D, there's what our building looks like. I'm going to hide the level lines in 3D. All right, so let's focus on creating a floor in this space. Technically, we want a floor for the whole building, but I want to do this room by room by room to show you different examples of the features that can be added with a floor. Actually, I'll do one big floor first, delete it, and then we can move on to the options. So here's the floor command. So we have architectural floor, structural floor, floor by face, and floor slab edge. Architectural floor is your basic floor composed of different materials. Structural floor has structural data embedded in it. Floor by face, if you've been modeling using masses, you can create floors based on those masses. And then it's slab floor edge, or floor slab edge, if you are creating a slab floor that needs a thickened edge. So in the floor command, we have our drawing tools. We have boundary lines, slope arrow, and span direction. So I'll cover all these options in a moment. So I'm going to do a full floor. Once you've defined where you want the edges of the floor to be, you use the check mark to complete the command. Under options, offset. So if I pick a wall, how far beyond that wall do I want the edge of the floor to be? Extend to wall core. If I'd picked a complex wall assembly that had wood studs and then finishes on both sides, do I want my floor to actually go up to the structural part of the wall, or do I want it to stop at the finishes? Over here we have our floor types, and we have a number of floor types to work with. I'm going to pick lightweight concrete on metal deck. The only reason I'm picking that is because this particular floor style has a hatch pattern to it, so it's easier to see. So if I want to sketch out where I want my edges of the floor to be, I pick walls, and then I can pick, and pick. Now, please note these two extra lines that appeared on the first wall that I selected. If there is a structural component to your floor, like joists, then that determines which direction the structure is being considered for this floor. If you need to modify the direction of the span, you can click span direction and pick a different edge to represent the direction of that slope. So if I hit the check mark, there's my floor. Okay, so you can see it with a hatching pattern. I'm going to do a section through this building, and just to show you how the floor is positioned in difference from the walls. When we placed our walls, the base of the wall or bottom constraint was at the level line, and the top constraint was at the level 2 line. But when you create a floor, it considers the current level or defined level line as the top of the floor, and therefore the thickness of the floor is downwards away. So you end up with this sort of situation going on right here. So we would typically maybe do a foundation wall here and a foundation wall there. I just wanted you to be aware of how floors are applied and how that's different from walls. All right, so that is how you place your basic floor. You notice as I'm clicking around here, I cannot select the floor. In Revit, we have in the bottom right corner, or edge or face, we have a number of options here. One of them is select element by face. If this is turned on, you can then click on the face of something in order to select it. I actually want to delete it, so that's why I wanted to be able to do that. Let me hide EH. Element hide that section line. So going back to the floor command, floor, this time instead of me picking walls, I just want to create a floor that's just here in this room space. So I could use pick line or I could sketch. I'll use pick line here for a moment just to point out the fact that when you use pick line, you have to make sure that the outline is perfectly joined. Each segment is joined end to end. So you need to make sure that you fill it or trim extend a corner. Make sure it's closed and then use the check mark. Okay. Now, if you want to create a floor that has an opening in it, there are two ways of doing that. We could either just create the floor and then identify a closed shape within the floor, like this. There. So in the sketching of the floor, I have my floor perimeter, but so let's say I want an opening here. Then I can hit the check mark, and now you can see I've got an opening there. And let's see, look at that in 3D. There we go. Right. Now that is great if you want to create an opening in one floor. If you wanted to create openings in multiple floors, such as in the example of an elevator shaft, which would also go through ceilings and roof, actually, then you would need to use those commands, the shaft opening commands that you see up here. Okay, so let's go back to our plan view. I'm going to select this floor, and now I want to edit it. So it's already there. I could select it, edit boundary, and then what I could do is I can delete that opening and hit the check mark, and then I now have my floor. So let's have a look at some of the other options that are available when it comes to editing a floor that's already in place. If I select the floor, I have for modifying tools, edit boundary, modify subelements, add point split line, and pick supports. These features here typically work or deal with slopes to your floors. If I go to edit boundary, I have the ability to, I'm back in the sketching screen, and you'll see I do have an option called slope arrow. That allows us to create a slope for the entire floor in one direction. So if you look over in properties, you see constraint is level 1, and the properties there are for the floor itself. So you could actually see, you could find out what's the perimeter area, cubic, square footage, cubic footage, etc., etc. But if I place in an arrow point, so I'm pointing in the direction of the slope, then my properties are identifying, okay, if this is a sloped floor, what is the height at one face? This is, in this case, the left side. And what is the height from the level on the face on the right? So it's 1 foot. You can set that to whatever you need, but when I select the check mark here, if I do a section horizontally, or sorry, from left to right or east to west, you should be able to see that slope. So the offset for the slope is 1 foot at this end, 0 feet at this end. And that creates a slope in one direction. If you need to modify that, you can. You can select it, and you can change whatever the height offset needs to be. Let's say I want it to only be 4 inches. And now if I look at this 3D, you get a sense there. If I look at it in section, you can see what that looks like. So that's how you create a slope floor. But what if you want a floor that is sloped towards a drain? So not one slope, but several slopes leading to a point. And the process I'm going to show you, procedure I'm going to show you, also applies to roofs. Okay. So when we look at level 1 again, and let's look at, let me hide this, whoops, element hide. So let's say, and just for simplicity, I'm going to change the style of floor to something that doesn't have a hatching pattern, such as generic. Just so we can see the actual slope lines more clearly. So I'll select this floor and add point. So when I go to add point, my perimeter of my floor becomes green with points or grips at each corner. But I'm going to be using my mouse to click on a location for a low point. And so in the options bar, you'll see it says elevation. So wherever I'm going to click, I have to identify with this value how much lower, with a negative value, or how much higher of the positive value I want that point to be. Relative means relative to the current location, vertical location of the floor. So let's say I want this to be -3 inches. And now what I can do is I can select the point. So that is now sloping down to a location that is 3 inches lower than the edges. And you get all these nice, valley lines, if you will. So if I hit escape and escape again, those lines stay. And if we look at this in section view, it's hard to see it, but there it is. That's it right there. And it's not much of a slope. I could have exaggerated it, but didn't think it was a point. But all right, so that's how you add a low point. Now, if you need to make a change to a low point, you can select and the floor, and you'll see we have modify sub elements. Well, in that case, I can select the object I want to modify, in this case, the drain location, and I can say I actually want that to be -6 inches. Enter, hit escape, and again, our floor plan view. If you do not want to have that slope, then you can simply select the floor, modify sub-elements, select the point here, and hit the delete key. The grips at the corners let you identify those corners at different elevations if you wanted everything to flow down to one corner. All right, so for the next thing I'm going to show you, I'm going to delete all the floors, and I'm going to also delete those interior walls. If I have a large room or space, and I add in a floor, let me just change that floor style to 12-inch generic. So I pick a wall, and notice in this case I picked on the outside of the wall, and therefore the perimeter of the wall will be on the outside, or the edge of the floor, sorry, will go to the outside of the wall. If it turned out that's not what you want, you can click on these little flip arrows, flip grips, and it will change the orientation of the edge of the floor. So if I create that floor, and looking at the section, let's see what that looks like now. Then if I wanted to separate the floor into two floor sections where one is going to have a slope, low point, and the other isn't, that's where split lines come into play. A split line is a dividing line that will allow you to treat each part of the floor as a separate floor. So now I could add a point, set it to -6 inches, and pick a point here. So I have a sloped floor here, but this floor here is not sloped. And so if we look at the section, see there, you can see how it slopes down, slopes back up, and it's flat over here. Let's see, what else would there be? The pick supports lets you identify on a floor where there is going to be a structure below, like a beam, and it will always keep that that line edge as a boundary for sloping. So you can't slope a floor through a beam. So the last thing I want to talk about is how to let me get rid of these slopes and that one there. I want to show you about the shaft opening command. So when I take a look at a side view, I've got my two elevations here. Let me create about 5 more. So if I go to the level command, I can make plan view. I'm going to set the offset to 10 feet and pick line. So if I do this, all right, that was nice and easy. So now if I select my floor, I can use copy and then paste to selected levels. So I can say I want to paste from all the levels, level 2 through level 6. I'm not bothering with the walls. I just want to do the floors. Okay. And as a matter of fact, in my 3D view, I'm going to hide all those walls. So let's go to level 1. Let's say I want a shaft opening going up through all the floors. Then I would go to, in my architectural ribbon, shaft. It's a sketching command. If you look over here, you'll see base constraint is level 1 minus 1 foot. Top constraint is unconnected 20 feet. We need to identify how high do we want that to go, the shaft opening, and then we're going to sketch where we want that shaft opening. So if we look at this in 3D, you can see that shaft opening. Now you notice the shaft opening goes even through the level 1 floor. If you do not want that, and the reason it's going through that floor is because under properties, base constraints level 1 minus 1 foot. If I were to change that to, say, 0, apply, now you can see it's not going through the bottom floor line. If you want, you can use grips to adjust the shaft opening parameters, the top and bottom. So let's say I only want the shaft opening to go through these floors. Now let's go to level 2. And you can see that we've got our floor here. And the shaft opening is right here. Now, on a floor plan, it's hard to tell when there's a shaft opening because it looks just like a rectangle. So in drafting, we have a symbol that we use to represent an opening. So if you select your opening and select Edit Sketch, you can create what's called a symbolic line. So sketch this, and for the case of what we work on, an X represents a floor opening. What's really neat about symbolic line is that it doesn't just appear on this level, it appears on all levels where that opening exists, but not in a 3D view, just on a plan view. So that is how you create a shaft opening and manipulate it.